F1 on BBC Radio 5 Sports Extra.
Hello and welcome to Mexico City, where we are getting ready for the final free practice session ahead of round 19, the Mexican Grand Prix this weekend. We've had 2 practice sessions yesterday already, and Max Verstappen, unsurprisingly, was the fastest man in both, pipping Lando Norris in the McLaren in FP2 yesterday. And we're getting ready on a nice, beautiful day. 20 degrees air temperature, no chance of rain, unlike the drizzle that we saw yesterday afternoon. And I'm joined once again by Alex Brundle, European sports car champion, sitting alongside me. Alex, all the teams and drivers have been pouring through their data, trying to work on the cars, find a little bit of gain. And who do you think had the most work to do? Who are you looking forward to seeing out there on track today?
Well, it certainly seemed like Ferrari, from the data that we've seen, were struggling a little bit with the car through yesterday, but it was incredibly close all the way down the field. Not a lot separating the times throughout free practice 2. A second took you all the way down to Pierre Gasly in 16th place. So there's very, very fine margins. They'll all have been working incredibly hard to make sure they have their cars dialed in on what is an extremely swiftly evolving Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez here in Mexico.
Beautiful pronunciation. 17 corners around this circuit that's at high altitude, and the thin air means that the cars were sliding around a lot yesterday. The track, as you say, was evolving, the times were coming down, and that should still be the case once again today. Charles Leclerc was in 3rd place yesterday behind Lando Norris, and the time's very close. 1 minute 18.6 was Max Verstappen's benchmark for the weekend so far. And I guess that means that mistakes get punished when the times are that close. You make a lock-up in any corner and it can cost you. And there's a couple of key braking zones around this circuit as well.
Certainly the braking zone for that first corner, you've got a long time to think about it and not a lot of downforce to help you, and then the braking zone in turn 4. You're quite right, the performance from Charles Leclerc over 1 lap and potentially later on in qualifying was probably the best of Ferrari's day. But when you look into the long run data, that's where they really started to struggle trying to deliver those lap on lap performances. It's a tough circuit as well through the middle sector. The high-speed changes of direction punish any lack of balance and poise, and then that tricky final sector through the stadium where the mechanical balance of the car has to be absolutely right.
3 very different sectors here in Mexico. We've got the first sector with long straights, big braking zones, and a couple of chicanes punctuating that. Then the middle sector, which is faster corners, sweeping corners, but the driver's still struggling, sliding round through there in this low downforce configuration. And Fernando Alonso actually had a spin there, the spin of yesterday. Everyone else running a very clean day with no other yellow flags at all. But Alonso had a spin, managed to catch it and not end up in the wall. So we had green flag running throughout. The final sector through the Forresol baseball stadium that could take 65,000 fans. It's super tight and twisty through there in a Formula 1 car, and then you exit a couple of right-handers at tight 1 at turn 16, and you accelerate through turn 17, and that is your lap around the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez. We had another couple of interesting drives yesterday. Valtteri Bottas was very quick in the Alfa Romeo, just behind Charles Leclerc, who, despite being 3rd, wasn't too enthusiastic with his performance, as you mentioned, Alex. Daniel Ricciardo also back in the car once again, returned in Austin after sitting out a few races for his broken metacarpal he incurred in 2nd practice in Zandvoort, and he looked really strong yesterday. He'll be gunning for a clean FP3 session and a good crack at Q3, we think, for qualifying.
Yeah, really will. Both those drivers out of position, to be honest. It must be said that was the best performance for Valtteri Bottas in a free practice session that has run its distance, that has run its time in 2023, and of course the best performance for Daniel Ricciardo, jumping back in to that AlphaTauri at any session this year, although there haven't been many of them for him. So both of them will be aiming to have a very good qualifying, and it's very important, isn't it, for Ricciardo? If he's going to keep on putting pressure on hometown hero Sergio Perez's seat for next year, to be absolutely at the front of proceedings here. He's got to show something special throughout the rest of this year if he's going to snatch that seat away, or indeed build into a strong season in 2024 and potentially make a challenge when contracts are up in 2025.
Indeed. 4 races to go this season then, and the 34-year-old Aussie, who's returned after missing the first half of the year with a point to prove still. He's pole sitter here in the past as well, and he will be gunning to try and show what he can do. Yuki Tsunoda will start this race from the back of the field after changing plenty of parts, engine components and others as well for him, gearbox as well for Tsunoda, so a clean sweep. And the sound you can hear is a bit of dance music, pump-up music in the Red Bull garage. No driver in sight. Verstappen not in the garage as yet. Perez not in the garage either. Both drivers having a bit of a late start to this session. Were you a fan of the pump-up tunes before you were getting in for a session?
Oh yes, it's not my genre though, as you know well. I do prefer a little bit more of a rock ballad.
Heavy metal, I seem to recall.
Heavy metal or light carbon. Indeed, that was the garage of Sergio Perez, who ended up 5th position yesterday at the end of free practice 2, on a day where I would say, even though he did end up behind Max Verstappen in both sessions, he was closer to the pace throughout the various stages of running than we've seen him in recent times to the Dutchman, and very much a heartening day of running for Sergio Perez.
Big weekend for Sergio Perez. The Mexican Grand Prix it could almost be renamed the Sergio Perez Grand Prix. There's so much attention for him around here. There are reports that 100,000 fans came through the gates on a Friday already yesterday around this place, and the support for Perez is so huge. Got on the podium last year. His father was celebrating it wildly, joining the fans down there, the podium above the baseball stadium. Such a brilliant atmosphere. And for Perez, who's had a tough run of form, still battling for second in the championship, it's a crucial one to try and cement a decent run into the season and claim second in the championship. Hamilton is the driver that could take it off him. 39 points separating the two.
Yeah, 39 points indeed. And then actually, you look back down the road, if he had a real disaster, through to the end of the year, and there's a real gaggle of championship contenders there for Sergio Perez, with it, notwithstanding the fact that there are not that many Grand Prix remaining in this season. You've got Fernando Alonso and Carlos Sainz sitting another sort of 18 and 20 points back. So Sergio Perez, if he had a really difficult end to the season, could be under pressure down into sort of the middle of the top 10 of the championship standings. He needs to make sure, even if he bleeds points to Lewis Hamilton throughout the remainder of this season, it's not too many. You can hear Valtteri Bottas, who is our first driver out on track.
So with 57 minutes and 18 seconds left in this session, we have a car on the circuit, and it is Valtteri Bottas, 4th quickest yesterday in the Alfa Romeo, and he comes round towards turn 6. Lance Stroll is out on circuit, and now Fernando Alonso heads out as well. So as the pump-up tunes were playing in the Red Bull garage, the Aston Martin guys were both in the car, and it was a very different atmosphere there. Steely silence, lots of focus, and Aston Martin had a tough day yesterday. I mentioned Alonso, the only driver to have a big spin, and they didn't manage to hook up a soft tyre run. Of course, qualifying later on will be all about maximising that soft tyre. So Aston Martin have gone straight out. They've still got a lot of progress to make, and that is why they are 2 of 3 drivers out there. Everyone else waiting. Didn't look like Red Bull were going to be joining the fray anytime soon. But joining our fray is the BBC's chief F1 writer. Back again for more, Andrew Benson. What are you intrigued about this session?
Well, I think we had a very opaque practice session yesterday, both 2 sessions.
Opaque?
Yeah, it was hard to read the order, is what I mean. Not transparent. The order wasn't transparent.
I like it.
So I think Max Verstappen is the obvious favourite, but the McLaren looked quick on the long runs. It was actually quicker than the Red Bull in Lando Norris's hands, although there was a slight confusing factor there because he was running new mediums on that long run and Verstappen had slightly used mediums. Lewis Hamilton said the car had changed night and day compared to Austin last weekend when he thought it was really great from lap 1. He thought it was pretty awful yesterday, and it looked like it on the where he was on the timing screens. I think 7th he ended up. Ferrari was struggling, and Alonso, you don't see him spin very often, do you? And he lost it at high speed through the S's, and I think that was, I suspect, I mean, we were talking about this yesterday, the problem they've been having with that car is that as they've tried to develop it through the season and failed, really, is to introduce a nervousness to that car, and I guess that was evidence of that nervousness. But they're sticking with their new floor, so I'm interested to see where they shape up too. So I think it's kind of like a day where we have our expectations set for us, rather than having those expectations already.
Yeah, lots to learn still in this final hour. 55 minutes just under left on the clock. 54 and 50, 49, 48 left on the clock. Both Aston Martins came through the pits. They are back out on circuit, as are the two Ferraris, and Valtteri Bottas is the first man to complete a lap on the hard tyre as Sergio Perez mooches into the back of the Red Bull garage, looking very cool, calm and collected. And he will put on his helmet, and he's still not going to be out for a while then.
Yeah, certainly not for Perez. He's very much relaxing in the garage. That cockpit of Valtteri Bottas ceded yesterday to Théo Pourchaire. They had a tremendous amount of reliability problems with that Alfa Romeo, brake-by-wire issues. They couldn't solve all the way through FP1 for Théo Pourchaire. Definitely did not bode well for running in what are technically difficult conditions here in Mexico. They were one of several teams who had early issues, but definitely, I would say, the only team throughout FP1 that had issues which just continued, and issues that they couldn't resolve.
It was a shame for Théo Pourchaire, one of 5 rookie drivers that were taking the FP1 session. Ollie Behrman in the Haas was probably the standout of them. Haas very, very impressed. Ayo Komatsu, the chief engineer there, singing Behrman's praises, who was keeping Nico Hulkenberg quite honest, the 18-year-old young Brit, getting his first chance of driving a Formula 1 car on a Grand Prix weekend. This is the sound of Carlos Sainz, who's out there on a set of soft tyres and getting straight on with it. So both Ferraris were a little bit underwhelmed with their own performance yesterday. They admitted they're a bit behind where they'd want to be on a day where Verstappen topped the times, Norris was close. Mercedes looked okay on the long runs if they were missing a little bit on the low fuel. And Andrew, interesting comments then from Lewis Hamilton, saying the car is night and day different to what he had in Austin. Of course, the obvious question is, the car was illegal in Austin. Can we take anything from that now there may be an illegal configuration, the upgrades are not quite as dramatic as they were, or is this a case of just not honing it into this very different circuit?
Well, that's a really interesting question, Jolyon, isn't it? It is the obvious one, of course. People outside Mercedes would argue that obviously Mercedes ran the car too low in Austin. That should be a performance advantage. And therefore their competitiveness in the race was skewed by that fact. Mercedes would say that they don't really believe it changed their performance that much. They were just, and they were very pleased with the way the new floor behaved. But it's a slightly contradictory position, isn't it? Because the floor, the new floor doesn't work in isolation. It works with the ride height that you set for the car. I mean, you would expect lower is better with these ground effect cars. So. But then it has been a very unpredictable car. It's gone from one weekend when it's been really competitive, or pretty competitive, to one weekend where they've struggled, and they find it difficult to get the car into the right window, as they call it. This idea of a setup window, by the way, I'd be interested to hear one of you to explain exactly what that means, because you hear it from drivers a lot, but they never really say in layman's terms what that actually is.
So it's a combination of elements where the car is making its greatest efficiency in balance, and that's the aim. Obviously, you've got, I always talk about 2 boxes in terms of race car setup. You've got one box, if you like, which says efficiency. That's things like lack of drag, high levels of downforce, engine power, and the ability, brake function, the ability to deliver all the assets of the car. And then you've got another one, balance, which is what you can hear Valtteri Bottas losing through the mid-corner of turn 10. And that is everything working in harmony and giving the right feel to the driver, which is where your squishy bit behind the steering wheel starts to communicate with the race engineers and give you a feeling. But I think for Lewis Hamilton, the answer really is more annoyingly complex than that, which is that when you talk about windows, all cars in the field, everything being relative, of course, with car performance, are in an entirely different window here in Mexico, because they can all run a considerably lower ride height than they could in Texas. That's because this circuit is much less bumpy than the circuit of the Americas is. So you could have that Mercedes jumping back, or you just as a basis of not running at an illegal ride height, or you could have the fact that their floor, their ride height and their aerodynamic elements don't work as well as the rest of the field at what is a lower available ride height here in Mexico.
And that's a really interesting point, because one thing Hamilton did say on Thursday was that, and this is true because I've heard this being talked about through the year, is that actually after struggling last year with a car that was designed to run as low as possible and that induced porpoising, they deliberately designed this car to have its optimum set up at a higher ride height than last year. Whereas Red Bull, because they saw Red Bull doing that basically last year, but actually Red Bull went the opposite way, and their car is optimised to run more effectively at a lower ride height this year than it was last year. So what you're saying could actually be an explanation for why they're struggling in Mexico or on smooth circuits.
Well, in the previous generation of car, and you'll recall this, Andrew, Mercedes always had this incredible control over the rear ride height of the car as it went down under downforce compression. And with this iteration of the regulations, a lot of those controls were banned. My sense with that, and it's always a speculation and a bit of a driver theory, is that they were expecting to be able to garner more control over the rear ride height than they were actually able to do, therefore generated a peaky floor which they've had to massively move back on or regress on, because effectively they don't have the control they thought they did.
It's a really interesting point. You're talking about there was kind of hydraulic suspension control systems that were being run through the sort of late 2010s and into the early 2020s, 2021, which Mercedes were a master of. The FIA banned them because they thought they were getting too close to replicating some forms of active suspension, which most of the engineers in the pit lane didn't think was the case, but the FIA stepped in and did it anyway. And it's actually interesting as a sort of side issue, but related. One of the issues with this current generation of cars, these ground effect cars, is some drivers particularly more than others, complain about the lack of ride quality. They have to be run so stiff to keep the aerodynamic platform stable to make the ground effect work properly. And a lot of engineers up and down the pit lane think that if the FIA reintroduced those hydraulic suspension systems, they'd be able to resolve that issue for the drivers without, with actually the fear that the FIA think they have about the suspension not actually really being real.
Lewis Hamilton has hit the top of the times. Now he's out there on the soft tyre. His first lap of the day in 19.2, just fractions quicker than Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz, who have been out, done one flyer on the softs and come back in. This is the sound of Lando Norris, who moments ago had a whopper of a drift coming out of the final corner, wheel spinning his way towards the line. He had done the fastest final sector of all at that point, but Hamilton's taken it away. Norris has slotted into fourth ahead of Tsunoda and Bottas. I almost found the Hamilton comments yesterday almost a bit provocative. He's mentioned before the weekend that he thinks other cars were illegal, the illegality of the car, the Mercedes in Austin, was not a major deal. And then to come out the first day back and say the car is night and day different, I almost wonder if he's just poking the bear, poking the media and saying, make something of this. Because it's the obvious take is that now it's legal, it's very different. And Mercedes, they were very mixed yesterday. Long run pace looked okay, quali pace didn't look so good. George Russell has just come through on his first lap today and matched what Max Verstappen did yesterday. In fact, he's a fraction quicker already early on in FP3. So Russell is now half a second quicker than Hamilton. I wonder if they're holding something back here, Mercedes.
I wouldn't be surprised. What's funny is sort of halfway through this season, I kind of changed my approach to weekends. I tried to turn my Friday practice reports into something a bit less straightforward and a bit more quotes-led by the end of the day, to give a sort of sense of the feel of the day rather than just a matter-of-fact report. And quite often, Lewis Hamilton would provide the quote that enabled me to do that, because he was either in the depths of despair with the car or really optimistic about what he was going to do. But when I look back and what happened subsequently through those weekends, is quite often, if he'd been really positive on the Friday, they'd be a bit rubbish on Saturday and Sunday, and if he'd been really negative on Friday, they'd turn it around and be competing for pole on Saturday. So I kind of stopped doing it because I couldn't rely anymore on what he was saying.
It's going to be reverse correlation. Wait till the end of the year and you see it stack up. Here's the sound of Pierre Gasly having a spin coming into turn 12.
All okay? Yeah, all good.
We've had 2 episodes of Balance You Can Hear, haven't we? First one was provided by Lando Norris with the wheel spin through the Exeter final corner. That was a little bit more of an aggressive episode of Balance You Can Hear by Pierre Gasly through the mid-corner of turn 12.
There's not a huge amount of runoff there either at turn 12. Just through the mid-corner, got towards the exit, and it was a lazy spin there for Gasly on a medium compound tyre. At the start of this session, we've only had half the cars out there. Still no sign of the Red Bulls. Waiting in the pits is Verstappen and Sergio Perez. Perez now being strapped in, so we can expect him out on circuit in the next few moments. No sign of the Haas drivers or the Williams drivers either. The other 13 drivers have taken to the track. Daniel Ricciardo, the other man who's waiting. This is the sound of his teammate Yuki Tsunoda, who again will start from the back of the field, so he'll be on a different run plan today. Qualifying not going to be a major concern, and Tsunoda's got in very deep for turn 12 and missed that corner out.
Just one final point on the Mercedes. I think all impartial observers, people who don't have a favourite team effectively, so like us three, I guess, hope that this Mercedes flaw is a step forward, because they're talking about it as lessons for next year. And I think one of the concerns about Mercedes this year is that despite all the problems they had last year and then through this year, there's never really been that much evidence that they properly understand how to make this generation of car work. And if this flaw works, because they on the basis that they're viewing it as something that can move them forward for next year, then that's the first bit of genuine optimism I can think of seeing, that Mercedes really might be able to sort themselves out and be competitive next year.
But one more question on Mercedes, back to you. They are one of 2 teams to have beaten Red Bull in the last year and a half. Carlos Sainz and Ferrari the other, but George Russell won the Brazilian Grand Prix last year. Mercedes were genuinely competitive. They fought with Verstappen for the win here. They kept Red Bull on their toes. And you could have said the same last year when it looked like they'd got a handle on things, the porpoising was being solved, and then they made a big step backwards over the winter. So they're actually still less competitive now than they were this time 12 months ago.
Yeah, so actually on the qualifying averages, they've moved forward a lot this year over the course of the year, from the first half of the year to the second. What they haven't really done is improve their race pace compared to Red Bull. I think the difference between last year going into this year and this year going into next year, theoretically at least, is that we didn't know this last year, but last year going into this year, they were sticking with the same car concept, which Hamilton was always not happy about. And as soon as he drove this year's car and it felt exactly the same as last year's car at Silverstone, before it even got to the Bahrain pre-season test, he knew they were in for a difficult year. And basically, although they sort of hid the truth through the Bahrain test in terms of what they said, the on-track performance was pretty clear. As soon as they got to Bahrain, they were rubbish on Friday afternoon. Hamilton came out straight away and said, we've gone the wrong direction on the car, we need to change it. And they accept that now. And Toto Wolff was saying the same thing through that Bahrain weekend. So I think so they know that they need to change fundamentally the philosophy of the car for next year. The only question is, do they fully understand these ground effect regulations to the point that they, with that philosophy change, has Piastri?
The ride and rear grip feels pretty terrible.
Understood. He's struggling with ride and rear grip. He's not in the setup window yet, is he, Alex? Just to finish that point, do they understand it enough to make that step that they need to make to compete with Red Bull?
A lot of cars struggling with ride and rear grip, it would seem. I heard a few moments ago Lewis Hamilton bouncing his way down the front straight, everything moving around underneath the drivers. We've seen a fair few moments, especially through the middle sector. Oscar Piastri does make his way back into the pit lane, presumably for some adjustments from the team. It's Russell and Hamilton out front, Leclerc and Sainz next up, and they're going 2 by 2 with the 2 McLarens in 5th and 6th position at this stage. Still missing laps though from a good proportion of the field. You're listening into George Russell, who has an oversteering moment through the middle of turn 10 and a little bit of wheel spin as he crests the rise back onto the racetrack for good measure.
Yeah, big slide that from Russell. The corner where Fernando Alonso had his spin yesterday in the high-speed section, still catching drivers out. Got to have really, really sharp reactions to keep it pointing in a straight line. There's not huge runoff areas around this circuit generally. Gasly is now on another flying lap on his medium tyres that he's on at the moment. And yeah, he managed to spin it on a sixpence at turn 12, where he approaches once again now, but a fair way off the pace of Russell, who has set the fastest lap of the weekend so far. But as mentioned, still no sign of the Red Bulls. Verstappen and Perez waiting in the garage, as are the two Williams, as is now Kevin Magnussen and Daniel Ricciardo. Hulkenberg has taken to the track and is starting a flying lap on the soft tyres. And as yesterday, if you've got any questions for Mr. Alex Brundle, Mr. Andrew Benson, or myself, Jolyon Palmer, please do get in touch. Hashtag BBC F1. And we have 40 minutes of practice remaining to try and answer them and to see a clear picture before qualifying later.
I am interested by this balance change they are suffering with, because, you know, the track and air temperature are not, vastly different from yesterday. We've not got huge gusts of wind out there, but the change in the way that the cars are behaving is ginormous in terms of the amount of oversteer that several drivers are suffering with. So it's interesting to see the track move forward. We've seen a generous amount of track evolution, but I find it hard to believe that they've not predicted that in terms of their evolution of balance in the cars.
A little bit gusty out there, tailwind through the middle sector, where we did see Russell have the big snap going through the turn 10 corner.
It could be that tailwind that's catching them out, I guess, as they change direction through 9 and 10.
Could be. Track cleaning up all the while as well. Charles Leclerc comes across the line. This is the sound of the Ferrari, up into third place, 6/10 down on George Russell. So Russell's just gone out and pumped in one really strong lap to start this day, and he's done a subsequent lap, had a big moment and come back into the pits. Carlos Sainz was pushing on the last lap, got really wide coming out of turn 12, straddled the curb and backed out of that one in the other Ferrari. So Russell, Hamilton, Leclerc, Sainz and Norris are your top 5. Then it's Stroll, Piastri, Hulkenberg jumps up to 8th in the Haas, and then it's Fernando Alonso on a set of medium tyres, as is Lance Stroll up in 6th, and Esteban Ocon also on the mediums, rounding out the top 10 for the moment. And we have a Red Bull on the circuit with 38 minutes and 48, 47, 46 seconds remaining. Sergio Perez, you didn't need me to tell you that. Cheers from the crowd as he comes through the Foro Sol Baseball Stadium into turn 16, and he will wind it up for a flying lap. Soft tyres on the Red Bull, and here he goes, winding it up, opens the DRS and launches into a flying lap.
Looks to be a comparative run from both of these Red Bulls. Max Verstappen just behind him on the road on his set of soft tyres as well. So having a look at what their performance level is like, and their performance level looks to be relatively good as Sergio Perez makes his way through that first sector, instantly ousted in the first couple of microsectors by Max Verstappen. The subsectors we divide the large 3 circuit sectors on the road. Bit of a lock-up though for Perez as he heads down towards turn 4, and it will have spilt a little bit of time as he rolls the car through the tight and tricky mid-corner of turn 6. Haas over on the driver's left-hand side of the circuit, clears out of the way of Perez as he crests the curb. Turn 7, turn 8 and turn 9. It's a lift out and then back into it through the mid-corner of 10 down to the final sector.
Verstappen on a flying lap behind Perez, and it is Perez who's faster in the first sector. Not much to separate them, just half a tenth, but Perez has lost a heap in the middle sector with that lock-up at turn 4. Went wide, thought he was going to run off the track momentarily as he pushed the braking a little bit too much on this first lap. This is the sound of the Mexican into the final couple of corners, getting on the throttle, coming through flat out now turn 17. He made a mistake there on his lap yesterday. Here's Magnussen.
I think one of the wheels is not on properly, so I'm coming in.
Copy.
That's a major for Haas. He's been released finally with 37 minutes left on the clock, and he will be back in. And that's a blooper, isn't it? Having sat in the garage for 23 minutes. Verstappen crosses the line and goes second. He's within a tenth of George Russell. Perez crossed the line and was 7 tenths down, but a load of that, pretty much all of that, was in the middle sector where he made that mistake at turn 4.
Albon up to P7 in the Williams. We heard that his target was inside the top 10 today. 2 bloopers there for Magnussen. The first one potentially sending the car out with a problem. The second one admitting it over the radio, because you need to just quietly come in if you can and get that sorted out so you don't pick up a penalty, which you can well do for releasing the car in an unsafe condition.
Could well be a fine then for Haas, and Magnussen is now wheeled back in, and it's a long wait, 23 minutes. It's frustrating for the driver as well, who's just sitting watching some other drivers. The Ferraris were out early, Bottas was out in the opening minutes, as were the Aston Martins. You're in a Haas, you wait for 23 minutes, you jump in, oh, the wheel's not on. Really? Magnussen's back in, the TV screens come down, and he will wait a little longer. And yeah, if the FIA are listening in, which they will be, then there could be a bit of an explanation to come for Haas as well.
Something worth mentioning right now at this, as we're 25 minutes into this session, is that a lot of the front runners are out on soft tyre, which is not normal in this sort of session. You would expect them to be more normally running the medium or the hard tyre at this point in the weekend. What that is demonstration of is that the soft tyre is not a good race tyre. It's looking like a one-stop race, probably starting on the medium, going to the hard. The soft tyre's got a lot of graining, and the medium and the hard are much better over a long run.
It's traditionally not easy to overtake on this circuit. Really long straight, really high top speed into the first corner. But again, because the air is thin, the slipstream effect is low, the DRS effect is low as well. And so actually track position is pretty crucial for this circuit. The configuration on a map would seem like you could overtake with some big braking zones, and you can. We've had some decent fights in the past, but it is not easy. So the one stop we would expect, and you're right, Andrew, with so many using up the soft tyres early on in this session, it looks even more to be the case. Question for you, Mr. Brundle, from Carrie. Red Bull probably don't feel as though they need much practice time, but why not run Checo, who could benefit from a little bit of extra practice in the first 20 minutes of the session? And also because the crowd would love it. Why wait if you're Red Bull?
Well, we do see teams getting drivers out there to pick up that TV time when there are not too many drivers on track. But everything's strategic. I mean, you're limited in your resources. You're limited in the number of tyres you can take through the weekend. And as you know so well, JP, every single action you take on a Grand Prix weekend, every single set of tyres, fuel you use, has a compromise set against it where you may well lose out later on. So I tell you what the crowd would really like is a great result from him at the end of the Grand Prix on Sunday. So that's what they'll be focusing on.
I often think, especially when you get to this part of the weekend, the drivers that go straight out are the ones that need to troubleshoot some problems. And that was Aston Martin, who we know had issues with the car with Alonso's spin and lack of performance yesterday. Ferrari were still scratching their heads overnight, and Red Bull were looking pretty good. Verstappen top both sessions. Perez was 5th in FP2 yesterday, but caught a yellow flag on his best lap, presumably when Alonso had his spin, and he thought there was a little bit more in there. He's also had a scruffy first lap. He's in 6th position, now 7th, as Carlos Sainz improves in the Ferrari. But basically, when you're in a decent position, you haven't got a huge amount of work to do on the setup. You can sit in and wait for someone else to clean up the track, even though the fans would have loved to see Perez out there. He's out there now. He's come through the pits, and he will go for another lap on the soft tyres. Again, not many drivers improving on subsequent laps on the softs. Daniel Ricciardo, though, up into 4th place.
That's on a set of mediums. So Daniel Ricciardo doing a lovely job, and it looks for all the world to be legitimate pace behind the wheel of that AlphaTauri.
He was full of it yesterday after practice. He was really pleased with the way things had been going, with the way the car was, with the way he'd been driving. He was very down on himself after Austin. He felt he's got a few things wrong there. I guess he's feeling a bit of pressure to perform. He must know, I'm sure drivers are aware of what people are saying about them. He knows that Liam Lawson came in and did 5 races looking very accomplished. He never was looking quite as quick as Tsunoda, but although he did beat him a couple of times, but he was very consistent, Liam Lawson, for a rookie. And Ricciardo's been given that race seat, so he needs to. I think he needs to. Also, he's come back to Formula 1. He needs to prove that he's the old Daniel Ricciardo, not the more recent Daniel Ricciardo, who was not competitive at McLaren.
Probably everyone apart from Sergio Perez and Yuki Tsunoda, maybe Liam Lawson, wants to see the old Daniel Ricciardo back as well, because when he is full of it, he's got such charisma and he's such a character that went away a little bit in his McLaren years, but he is on song so far, and that lap on the mediums in 4th place, a very strong start to his day.
Looks like that lap between the two AlphaTauris had a little bit of toe orchestration in it. Tsunoda moving out of the way down the front straight to give Daniel Ricciardo a toe. It is one of the longer front drags of the year, and it is one of the higher speeds of the year as well when you approach. I think it may even be, depending on the exact ambient, the highest speed of the year, heading down towards that first corner. So a toe ever useful, and quite easy to set one up, actually, isn't it? You can hang around in that final sector and dish it out all the way down to turn 1.
Especially when Tsunoda will start from the back of the grid, so he can just be employed in qualifying later to help Daniel Ricciardo out, presumably in Q1, because then he will go out and if he's especially helping Ricciardo, maybe at the cost of himself in his own track position, then that'll help Ricciardo get through Q1. I think Ricciardo's going to be aiming and gunning it to get through to Q3, and AlphaTauri, if they could get Tsunoda through, that'll be the crucial part for Ricciardo.
I was going to say, if the car's as quick as it looks, there's no reason why they can't get Tsunoda into Q2 as well and give him a tow there. Obviously, he's not going to... Actually, they could even do it into Q3 if he's quick enough. I think it's unlikely that the AlphaTauri will get both cars into Q3. You certainly wouldn't expect it on a normal weekend, but this doesn't look like a normal weekend for them, so let's see what happens.
Just approved across the line again on that set of medium tyres, Daniel Ricciardo, and they're going to be rather scratching their heads if Ricciardo now, for the final few races of the year, shows them what was really possible with that AlphaTauri that was upgraded mid-year and has shown flashes, it must be said, of great pace throughout the last 3 or 4 races.
The car's come on a long way, though, since the start of the year, and Nick De Vries had his woes, was dropped in the mid part of the season. In came Daniel Ricciardo. Ricciardo then broke his metacarpal. In came Liam Lawson. 4 drivers for that team this year, and now the car looks like it's in the best configuration so far, and Ricciardo is on form. So Verstappen has gone to the top of the times, 2 tenths clear of George Russell, who's still sitting there in second place with that early benchmark in the Mercedes. A really strong early lap from Russell, just now beaten by Verstappen. Perez is third, Ricciardo fourth on the medium tyres in the AlphaTauri. Brilliant effort from him in the first half of this session. Then it's Hamilton, Leclerc and Carlos Sainz, the top 7. Logan Sargent's up in 8th place on a soft shod Williams, with Albon and Norris running out the top 10. Then it's Stroll, Piastri, Hulkenberg, Alonso, Ocon, Tsunoda, Gasly and Bottas 18th. No time on the board for Kevin Magnussen as yet. He's still at the bottom of the times, so maybe it was more than just a loose wheel for Magnussen. 19th is Zhou then, 19th of the 19 runners.
I did see that very typical let's check the wheel hub shake that the mechanics do, where they grab the inside of the wheel hub and check for play on the inside of the left rear of Magnussen. So let's hope there's nothing structural there for him.
I mean, that's almost more frustrating when you've been sitting around for 20 minutes and then there's something structural that's wrong. At least a bit of finger trouble for a mechanic can happen any time, but the Haas team would have worked overnight, got the car prepared, waited for 23, 24 minutes, sent Magnussen out just after Nico Hulkenberg went out, and then he's come straight back in. So the Dane has no time on the board. Everyone else circulating and clocking up the laps. Verstappen now on 7 laps at the top of the times once again. The man that topped FP1 and FP2 only by a little bit yesterday, and he comes through and is going to start another flying lap, racking up, and Red Bull finding a little bit more pace on subsequent laps on the soft tyres. This is the sound on board the Dutchman heading down towards the first corner.
I think they need to work away at their long run pace. We were a little bit confused yesterday by the drizzle in the final sector, but it did look like Norris had from the data that we have of the long run on the medium, Norris actually ends up slightly faster than Max Verstappen. I know qualified, Andrew, by the differential in tyre life of a few laps, but they're definitely not where they often have been, where kind of over one lap the cars are very close together, and then over a race distance Red Bull have a clear pace advantage. It certainly doesn't seem to be that way this weekend. Looking in on and Charles Leclerc still pounding round on what appears to be a race run for him as well, or a race evaluation. Looking at where Ferrari were yesterday, 8 and 9 tenths respectively, Leclerc and Sainz, away from peak long run pace over an average of 10 to 15 laps or so. So they're really not in a happy place, at least yesterday.
That's the concern for the Scuderia, whose long run pace was really poor in Austin as well. They look like they've made some good progress in recent times. Sainz had his race win in Japan. Leclerc was very competitive as well. Sainz came through strongly. They were ahead of Mercedes. And then it's just gone away from them slightly in last week's US Grand Prix. So far through 2.5 practice sessions in Mexico as well, things are not looking easy. This is the sound of Alex Albon with 26 minutes, 33, 32, 31 seconds left on the clock. Medium tyres for Albon. And he was very quick yesterday, Albon. Second quickest in the first practice. Not so enthusiastic after the sessions, when the dust has settled, thinking if we can get a top 10, if we can get into Q3, that'll be a really strong result.
Yeah, it's always a bit of a curveball with Williams. Interesting to watch him finish that lap, Albon. The medium tyre really performing for them out there. That was the tyre Alex Albon was on, an improved final sector again. Whereas this seems to be one of those circuits, and we're seeing it now for Max Verstappen. You can listen in to him making his way through the middle sector with a big armful of oversteer in his Red Bull. It does seem to be one of the circuits where the soft tyre is giving drivers that nasty oversteery feeling of the car moving around on the compound. We're at the very softest end of the compound range here. The C5, which is the softest compound available to Formula One drivers, is the soft, and it certainly seems to be giving the drivers less feel than they might like over the rear axle, whereas the medium staying with them, which, listening in to Alonso and watching the attitude of his car, I can see.
A man that needs to find some performance. Fernando Alonso and Aston Martin. Alonso with 25 minutes left in the session, still on the medium tyres, down in 14th position. Lance Stroll ahead of him at the moment by 2.5 tenths, quarter of a second. Stroll's got over the Spaniard, and this is the sound of Alonso through the final couple of corners. Turn 16. People are giving the wall quite a lot of berth, aren't they, out of turn 16? I thought that would rubber in a little bit closer there.
It's really dusty out wide there, up next to the wall. Sergio Perez found his way out there yesterday and said, guys, I went off. I don't know if there's any damage. Such was the differential in grip he found out there.
Why is it not rubbering in, though? On any street circuit, it starts off dusty close to the walls, but everyone just wants to get as close to them as possible. You open up the track width, and that's the racing line.
Drivers have been cutting inside to finish, to close out their laps with the shortest distance to the line as the right-hander curves then towards the start-finich line.
But that's a bit later when they're flat out. They're still limited by when they can get on the power by the wall on the outside of turn 16. It is, seems a little strange. Everyone's giving it a bit of margin. Certainly Alonso was giving it a bit of margin. He still went quicker than Lance Stroll.
You'd be ringing it out there, wouldn't you, JP?
Of course. I'd be out there. I'd be maximising it, as I always did. I maximised it for a few laps, and then I'd go over the top. No one's done that yet so far this weekend. The Wolves have remained untroubled by 20 Formula One drivers and 5 rookies of yesterday morning as well.
They've had a good go, though. Fernando Alonso probably got closest with the big old spin yesterday. Oliver Behrman doing a fabulous job in the Haas. Did have rather a big moment as well as he headed through turns 7, 8 and 9.
Did you ever find a wall here?
I believe I've glanced.
Oh, see, that's the true pro, the glance of the wall.
I believe I've glanced.
Probably that turn 16, wasn't it?
The final wall, but it was a sports car race, so I had 6 hours to go at it.
Eventually it's going to get you, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's odds, isn't it, really? Eventually you're eventually going to go off. It's the old typewriter conundrum.
17 corners on this Mexico City circuit. It is really the final couple of corners. They've seen the most action so far. Max Verstappen, I think, was the first driver to hit the wall in the modern era of the Mexican Grand Prix in 2015. I was driving in the first session, FP1, and Verstappen had hit the wall at the end of it in a damp session. He's come a long way since then. 3-time world champion.
He's come on a bit since then, hasn't he?
He is not the 17-year-old rookie he was at that point. He has put it all behind him. Verstappen has won 4 of the last 5 Grand Prix at this circuit as well. He's got prodigious form. He topped both practices yesterday. With 22 minutes left, he sits at the top of the times once again, but just by 2 tenths over George Russell. This weekend so far, we've had a Williams running close, McLaren were close, Leclerc was quite close in FP2 as well. Russell now is 2 tenths back from Verstappen. And Perez, to the delight of the Mexican fans, is running in 3rd place as well. So it's still open, but Verstappen somehow always manages to just find that extra tenth. Somehow. The best drivers do it.
Yeah, if it's by a half a tenth or half a second, depending on how the car is performing, he does seem to find himself on top of the hill every single time. Interestingly, though, yesterday, when you look at Perez's long run, which was on the hard tyre, but very, very similar time and very, very similar kind of length to Max Verstappen's. He actually ran at a very similar pace to Verstappen. So at least in terms of race pace, even though he ended up 5th on the road, Checo looking in the hunt again.
It would be one of the popular results if Perez could get a podium this weekend. If he could get a win, it would be something else. If you've got to the most euphoric home crowd. I remember Kamui Kobayashi in Japan got a podium, and it was just something else, seeing the Japanese crowd, because Lewis Hamilton obviously does it at Silverstone, and year in, year out,
you've got Mansell-Mania's got to be up there, surely.
Mansell-Mania, but we're spoiled in the UK with having talents, the number of champions, the number of home race winners that we've got, and Lewis Hamilton every year gets an amazing reception. Lando Norris had huge cheers when he took the lead this year. But when you're in Mexico or you're at Japan, some other countries that haven't had the long line of champions that the UK has, they get a Mexican in the best car, and it really does rock the whole city. There's Perez banners everywhere in Mexico City. The support for just one driver is immense.
Certainly is. And you can hear it around the circuit. The home crowd cheers. The sound you can also hear is Carlos Sainz coming across the line on what is another very average race run. And for the two Ferraris, sitting 6th and 7th at the moment. The two Williams are alongside Ricciardo, the surprise interlopers this time, and Aston Martin appear to have got their act together a little bit. Fernando Alonso with the spin yesterday, notwithstanding. Lance Stroll was absolutely nowhere as well, only got 17 laps in the other Aston, and ended up 17th. I believe, yesterday, just with no feeling and absolutely no pace in the car. So it was a really torrid day for them.
They picked it up slightly so far today, 11th and 12th, but a far cry from where they should be, or where they were earlier in the season. A bit of a lull on track. Logan Sargent starts a flying lap in the Williams, but he's out there only with his teammate, with Esteban Ocon and the two Ferraris on some high fuel. In fact, Leclerc peels in as well. So with 19 minutes left, we will wait for the final flurry of quali simulation runs.
It's got to be said, we're still waiting for Albon on the soft. He's put in a lovely lap on the medium. Logan Sargent has put a lap in, 9/10 away from the ultimate pace. That's on the soft tyre. We'll see what Albon can do, but so far, so better for Logan Sargent after what was a good run for him in COTA. Is he out of trouble for you, JP, at this stage, if he keeps this level of form up?
He's having a better run so far this weekend, isn't he? But I don't know. Who knows? Who knows with Williams where they're at? There's a yellow flag out in the first sector as Sargent is on his lap, coming in towards the middle of the lap. Nola Pax on hashtag BBC F1 points out the obvious. Isn't that precisely what happened with the Dutch? Home support. They haven't had a Formula One champion, haven't they? Had Jos Verstappen, they had Guido van der Garde, and then they had Max Verstappen, and we get a raucous crowd every year in Zandvoort. That's when you talk about one guy transforming a nation's Formula One support and the whole situation of Formula One, the position of Formula One amongst other sports. Verstappen has to be one of the chief examples of that. Sargent comes across the line and goes third in the Williams on a new set of soft tyres. Here we go then, Albon on these soft tyres. As you mentioned, hasn't had a run on it yet, on the mediums in 9th, and he is putting this together.
He is absolutely putting it together, making the best of all of the circuit evolution. 4/10 up, purple in the first sector, purple in the second sector, over what Max Verstappen did early on in the session. Track ever coming towards him. It's going to be so interesting to see what Albon can do across the line. 17.9, 4/10 clear, 4.5 clear. Shouldn't do him that disservice of what Max Verstappen did earlier on. Fire the locomotive back up for the hype train.
Here we go, Albon. Benson, are you thinking Albon's in the fight here? Q3 surely.
It's looking like he could get into Q3, yeah.
Big gap between the two Williams teammates, 7/10 as well.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Logan Sargent, he's not been that quick, has he? He's decent in Austin last weekend, but he's got two boxes to tick to keep that drive. One is to not crash as much as he has been doing, and the other is to get a bit quicker. So yeah, I think it's touch and go for him at the moment for next year.
It's very difficult to read it, isn't it? Here's Ocon.
Not sure what happened there. Braking.
Yeah, copy that. We're going to have a look.
So Ocon started a lap on the soft tyres, had a big front left lock-up. You wouldn't expect the outside front to lock up as severely as that, but Ocon obviously wasn't expecting it either. Didn't know what happened there, and the team, Carol Lewis on the radio, will look into that.
It's a really big factor here in Mexico. If you don't get a lot of tyre energy anyway, the compression and the building of temperature and energy in the tyre. Then you go and run the car down what is an extremely long front straight through the air. The tyre cools and cools and cools as the front tyre especially meets with the air at 340 kilometres per hour. and you ask it to go from the absolute worst position where it's cold and hasn't got any energy to deliver its absolute most it ever does in terms of G under a heavy braking.
And that's exactly where Lando Norris is heading now, on a new set of soft tyres. Has he got the temperature in as he hits the brakes? At about 120 bar of pressure, up to 213 miles per hour for Norris in the McLaren, coming through turn 2, exiting turn 3, the right-hander, and now he'll stretch his legs up towards turn 4. Opens the DRS. Long straight, and then it's another big smash at the left pedal. On the brakes, he's 4,000s up on Albon. It's not a huge amount in the first sector, but we know that Williams is good in a straight line, and Albon showing it once again.
Really looked tidy though, didn't it, for Norris through the first sector? Can't fault it, hit his marks, hit his braking points, bounced over the curbs in the way that he needed to without adjusting too much the attitude of the car. But there's so much time as he arcs through turn 7, 8 and 9. The McLaren looking really well poised. His teammate Oscar Piastri though slightly up on what Norris managed to achieve, and slightly up on everyone through that first sector. Now 3/10 down for Norris through the middle sector of the lap. He is behind what Alex Albon achieved earlier on.
That Albon lap is not nothing in the Williams. It's a great benchmark for everyone to shoot for. Bottas has come through in the Alfa Romeo and gone third. The man that was fourth quickest yesterday on a track he has claimed pole at in the past. Here comes Norris to the line, and he's half a second down on Albon. Norris was rapid yesterday, and he's not showing that pace so far today. Piastri now through the final sector, and he's out wide. He's missed the corner at turn 12. Slows it down for 13, but Piastri has lost the lap at the end. Turn 12's a tricky one into the stadium section, and Piastri now has backed off it. Was looking quite quick, was neck and neck with Albon in the Williams. That's how quick Albon is, but Piastri not hooking it up in the end, crosses the line 10th quickest.
Got a better middle sector than Norris. I didn't see a specific error from Lando as he made its way through the curves, the sequential left and right snake of that middle sector, but certainly Piastri with a better performance. We're now looking at back-to-back qualifying runs for the two Mercedes, and it's George Russell who is 2/10 down from what Alex Albon's achieved. Lewis Hamilton behind him on the road. Russell making his way into the final 3 corners of the lap with seemingly good traction behind the wheel of the Merc.
Albon's lap is stonking. He's top of the times. The Mercedes duo now charging at that top time from the Williams, and Russell doesn't get there. He gets up to second place, but he's just shy of 3/10 away from Alex Albon in the Williams. Hamilton comes through. He's half a second down. He's in P6. The Williams is flying. He's been back through the pits. Albon tops the times with 13.5 minutes to go.
What can Daniel Ricciardo do? He is the man you can hear rolling into that final corner and getting the power on, driving the car to the most direct route to the line. P7 for Daniel Ricciardo. His strong weekend continues.
Not a huge gain for Ricciardo from the medium tyre to the soft though. His medium tyre lap in that first part of the session was very, very strong, and Ricciardo is good, but he's not finding huge gains. Huge amount of brake dust coming off the Mercedes, and I've seen this already through this session particularly. Brake dust, brake cooling, difficult, and the Mercedes was particularly difficult on that, and Hamilton actually couldn't stop the car coming into turn 12.
They're trying to generate that front temperature. The front brakes obviously sitting inside the front tyres. The more you're able to heat them up, the more temperature you can keep in those front tyres, and I suspect that is intentional from Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton to make sure he has temperature in that critical first braking zone. Listening in to Zhou Guanyu, who is having a bouncy time as he makes his way through the first 3 corners.
We've had no track limits issues, no lap time deletions all weekend. We don't typically get them in free practice anyway. I've also noticed people taking liberties with the apex curves.
I was a little bit surprised with the lack of improvement there. It felt pretty good in 1 and 2, but then it just didn't really come to me. A bit of understeer through 6.
That's as George Russell as you get.
It's so judgmental. I love it. I was a little bit surprised you weren't able to put a better car underneath me there, but perhaps you can have another go later.
The lethargy of that radio message as well. He's just gone for an adrenaline quali simulation lap, stomped it round for 78 seconds, and that's the feedback.
Sounded like he was in the debrief room already, didn't it?
Yeah, you can imagine what it's like with their headset on when they're there. A little bit surprised that the grip wasn't there for Russell.
Albon for pole?
Well, let's see. Max Verstappen is on an out lap. Piastri's improved on a second lap and gone up to third. He looks quick.
Will turn.
Went too quick into 4.
No, looks similar on entry. It's just a small squirt between 4 and 5, and then mid-speed turn 5.
So that was Pete Bonington to Lewis Hamilton, trying to find a little bit more time. He's now behind his teammate. Russell second has been very strong in this hour. He was quick in the first run, is quick in the second run, and he's ahead of Lewis Hamilton by a quarter of a second. So Hamilton, speaking with his engineer Pete Bonington, trying to find a bit of time. Albon's top of the times then from Russell and Piastri. Verstappen is starting a flying lap now, so we'll see what Verstappen can do. The man that topped both sessions so far, was top on the first runs, will be gunning to get back there again. He's got half a second to find to get onto terms with Albon. Behind Verstappen is Bottas, Norris, Hamilton, Ricciardo. Sargent's still there in 9th in the other Williams. Perez is on an outlap in the other Red Bull in 10th. Zhou 11th. The two Ferraris still sitting and waiting with 10 minutes left there. 12th and 13th, Leclerc ahead of Sainz. Then it's Ocon. The Aston Martins of Alonso and Stroll yet to go out on a soft. They're just on an outlap right now, 15th to 16th. Then Hulkenberg, Tsunoda, Gasly and Magnussen having a tough session. Went out, had an issue, came back in, and with 10 minutes left, has no time on the board as yet. But Albon, top of the time still.
Certainly is. Looking at Max Verstappen's lap progressing then. He's making his way into the final sector. It's going to be interesting to see where this lap falls for Max Verstappen, but he's not had it all his own way. He is still ahead of the lap that Alex Albon's done, but it's by shades, isn't it, JP?
It's not magic. It's not magic, this, for Verstappen, who has 2 goes at turning it into turn 13. That's really tight left-hander in the baseball stadium. This is the sound of the Red Bull now, accelerating out of the final corner, 150, 160 miles per hour, and he goes top, but only by 7/100ths of a second. Verstappen to the top from Albon and Russell. Fastest first sector for Max Verstappen, fastest third sector for Verstappen. Still, Albon quickest in the middle. The Perez fans are cheering because Sergio Perez is on a flying lap right now. He comes past the start-finish line, DRS open, and Perez will see where he can go. Verstappen only 7/100ths quicker than Albon.
It's a really strong opening start to this lap from Perez, though, and I do wonder if Verstappen has had an issue in the car or has not been able to attack the lap in the way that he would like. Let's see what Perez can do. It's going to give us a real feel for where this Red Bull is at. Purple through sector 1, but only by a tiny amount, 0.0717 ahead for Sergio Perez, and it certainly seems to be this middle sector where Albon's lap is absolutely magic. Everybody appears to drop time.
He's still the fastest person through the middle sector. That's the medium speed stuff. Here's Verstappen.
Couldn't have had more traffic on that lap.
So Verstappen bemoaning traffic on his flying lap. Didn't look particularly bad where we caught him at the end of the lap, but maybe he had some problems earlier on. Perez is a half a tenth down on his teammate through the middle sector. He's not as quick as Albon still in the middle sector, but he's neck and neck with the Williams driver and with his own teammate as he comes through the final couple of corners now. 8 minutes left on the clock. Ricciardo improves in the AlphaTauri. Still 7th place, 6 tenths away. Here comes Perez up to 3rd. He's within a tenth and a half. That's a good effort from Perez.
Very good effort from Sergio Perez. Albon now sandwiched between the two Red Bull. Slightly lethargic George Russell sits in 3rd position. Then it's Oscar Piastri who's ousted his teammate Lando Norris, and Valtteri Bottas sitting just behind Piastri and ahead of Norris. So a very interesting order to the end of this qualifying session. Let's see what the two Ferraris can do, who are exiting on sets of soft tyres.
Without Albon in this fray, this is looking like a Red Bull walkover. Verstappen and then Perez within a tenth and a half. 3.5 tenths back to Russell. If it wasn't for Albon sitting in there in the Williams, you'd be thinking Red Bull have got this under lock and key right now. But Albon's pace shows what anyone else can be aiming for really in the Williams. It's kind of come from nowhere. He was quick in FP1 this time of day yesterday. The cooler temperatures may be favouring the Williams slightly. Didn't have such a good run yesterday afternoon. And he's absolutely honked it around in FP3. Lance Stroll has almost honked it straight into the barriers in the middle sector on his flying lap in the Aston Martin. That car's still looking tricky to drive. Alonso's improved to only 15th position on a set of softs, and Stroll not improving, has fallen down to 18th. Here we go then, the last two cars on the softs. It's the two Ferraris, Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz. Let's see what they can get on the board. Leclerc Coming through the right-hander at turn 3 now, exits up to the curve and accelerates. He'll take a little bit of a slipstream from Nico Hulkenberg as he arcs to the right-hand side, lines up the straight line braking for turn 4, and he's a quarter of a tenth down on Verstappen, very close in the first sector.
Very plugged in, the Ferrari. Aston Martin looking spikier than a grumpy porcupine through the middle of the lap for Lance Stroll, and he was out. Plumes of dust and dirt flying off the rear of the car. It's Leclerc on the road, slightly ahead of Carlos Sainz. He's making his way through the middle sector now. A shimmy for the Ferrari. He's going to get traffic horribly from one of the Haas cars, and Leclerc pulls away and gives him a hip and shoulder in the middle of the lap.
That was Kevin Magnussen who Leclerc tripped over. So Magnussen has finally got out there. He's done a lap time, and then the second thing he's done is block Charles Leclerc's decent effort, and this is the sound of Carlos Sainz, who has flat spotted his soft tyres on the Ferrari. That is through the middle sector as well. So has Sainz had a spin there, because those tyres look pretty ruined, and he gesticulates to Lance Stroll, who he must have tripped over in the middle sector. So disaster for Ferrari. They waited and waited, and here's Sainz's radio.
This guy, honestly, this guy, if that's not a penalty, he cannot do that on practice.
Let's wait and see a replay, but Carlos Sainz letting his feelings known to his race engineer, to the race director as well, who'll be listening in. Here's the replay then, Alex.
So Sainz is going to head through the middle of turn 7, and the Aston Martin of Stroll is just absolutely parked on the apex of 8. He does make an effort though to move out of the way to the right hand side. I do think Sainz panics there more than necessary. Stroll's definitely in the way, but I think Sainz makes a bit of a meal of it there.
He almost wiped Stroll out as well when the Ferrari was spinning. So Sainz, he actually clobbered the curb at the apex, which unsettled his Ferrari, and he looks like he has really flat spotted all 4 wheels there, all 4 tyres vibrating.
Well, that's very dangerous what he did.
So 10 and 11, a right-left sweep. You've got Sainz making his way into the right-hander, and you've got Lance Stroll sitting on the apex of the right-hander and then darting across the racetrack to the outside of the sequential left-hander. Sainz trying to thread his way up the inside, panics slightly, locks all 4 tyres and spins the Ferrari, which is what they're discussing over the radio now.
And I don't think Stroll actually did anything completely ridiculous. He impeded Sainz, didn't he?
He's in the way, but he's not in the way in a horrendous manner, no.
No, Kevin Magnussen had done exactly the same to Charles Leclerc just up the road from this Ferrari, and you could just hear it there as well. Sainz got over the curve. I think he was distracted by the Aston Martin, who was absolutely impeding him, but not doing anything particularly dangerous other than sitting on the racing line. In fact, he tried to get out of the way late, Stroll did. We get that fairly regularly.
Yeah, it's just a little bit of a lazy avoidance from Stroll, isn't it? He's obviously discussing his own car on the radio. In any case, neither Ferrari managing to get a lap on the board there, both with their various contretemps with traffic.
Yeah, Sainz, I think, distracted more than anything. Leclerc's got tyres left to have another go. 3 minutes and 9 seconds left on the clock. Sainz surely will not be able to have another go. No, he peels off to the right-hand side and comes into the pit lane this time. So Sainz, with the spin, has managed to flat spot 4 tyres, 4 soft tyres at the end of this session, and he will go no further. So Leclerc, the only Ferrari driver that might be able to wind something up. He comes across the line with less than 3 minutes to go, and he's crawling this time. It looks like a double cool down.
Yeah, maybe trying to recharge and build again. They've got quite a way through the lap, haven't they? Before the impeding moment happened. You're listening into Leclerc, who's had his own moment with Magnussen, and I actually think that it was a very, very similar moment, a similar activity from the cars. I actually think that was slightly worse, to be honest.
Yeah, and that's what I mean with, Stroll had impeded Sainz, but only in the regular way of an impeding moment, and Leclerc didn't spin the car, Sainz did.
Yeah, Leclerc didn't know he was coming.
Well, I did warn you about it, and then you asked me about those extra laps, so I can't do it all at once.
Oh, no blame game at Haas.
Yeah, they're not enjoying their session, are they, the Haas drivers? I mean, I agree with both of you. I think actually Magnussen's was worse than Stroll's a little bit, and that Sainz probably overreacted and nearly had an accident in doing the spin. He nearly hit him, didn't he, as he came back, as he went into the runoff area. But I think you have to question, we were saying, Jolien, weren't we, in Austin last weekend, that Ferrari's race management, operational management, has got a lot better this year. But they've sent their drivers out into the middle of the worst worst practice traffic I've seen for a long time. So they've got to ask themselves some questions there as well.
And particularly catching drivers in the middle sector is a disaster because it's so difficult to get out of the way between turn 7 as you turn into the left-hander and the exit of it at turn 11. It's only a really short run before you find yourself in the stadium section at the end of the lap as well. So Ferrari's very much struggling to get a flying lap on. Leclerc can still do one. Tsunoda comes across the line in the AlphaTauri, jumps up to 7th. So that car is finding some good pace. And we have a question on hashtag BBC F1. And it's a very good point raised. Daniel Ricciardo has had pole position here in Mexico, and last year was actually ahead of Lando Norris as well. It could just be that he's a Mexico specialist, Daniel Ricciardo, rather than the new second coming of Ricciardo.
It's a good point. I was going to make it earlier, but then the moment passed. But yes, he's always good in Mexico, and he made that point himself yesterday in his interview that he liked this track, and that was part of the reason for his good performance, he thought.
There are enough straights and fast corners here, though, that the car needs to still be capable of physically doing it. It's got to be able to pull the G, deliver the straight line speed, and stop when he presses the brakes. There's no way around that one, no matter how well you're connecting the corners up.
It's always strange when a driver is a specialist on a certain track, isn't it?
I've never understood that.
No, you think if you're good around this configuration, then how about other low downforce configurations in Monza? Well, he was a race winner in Monza in the McLaren.
But that we all have circuits. COTA was one for me. Le Mans another one, where you turn up and it just so the corners just so happen to flatter all of your strengths, and there's nothing that exposes what are probably your weaknesses that you've not acknowledged. And I think
what were your weaknesses?
I think that's probably brake control.
Have you acknowledged
brake control down to the apex? It's taken me a long time, but I eventually acknowledged with much gnashing of teeth. I eventually acknowledged them.
You need the fast corners. COTA, first sector of COTA. You don't want to be brake controlling into those ones.
Exactly. Don't want to be braking at all.
It is. Sometimes I found Silverstone for me was always a great circuit because I'd grown up racing at Silverstone. I felt like I knew the place so well. But Ricciardo has not done more laps around Mexico than most of the other drivers around here, but he's just always gelled with this place, and he is looking decent. 9th place in the end for Daniel Ricciardo. Tsunoda, as mentioned, jumped up to 7th, so AlphaTauri looking with a good shot of getting at least Ricciardo into Q3. Tsunoda will start from the back of the grid tomorrow. And the checker flag has come out, bringing an end to Mexican practice for 2023. Verstappen ends top, but the big story is Alex Albon splits the Red Bulls. Albon within a 10th of Verstappen's time and will be gunning for a minimum of Q3, but a potential big result. Albon flying in 2nd, then Perez 3rd, ahead of Russell, Piastri, Bottas showing well again in the Alfa Romeo, Tsunoda, Norris, Ricciardo and Hamilton rounding out the top 10. Behind him, Sargent Joe, Leclerc down in 13th, Stroll, Sainz, Hulkenberg, Alonso, Gasly, Magnussen and Ocon rounding out the field. Miserable time for Alpine. We saw Ocon have a lock-up, but 18th and 20th is a tough return for them.
I think those two cars may well be struggling. It's a difficult weekend for the power unit. It's a complex area that you're putting the power unit into, and I do wonder if Renault are being able to deliver them exactly what they need at this weekend to be competitive.
They had a horror show in Monza as well, didn't they? Struggled to make it through, didn't make it through the first part of qualifying. Here's Leclerc.
So lap time from Sainz was 19.3.
Yeah, whatever. There's nothing to learn from the second lap.
Not a happy camp, Ferrari. Sainz not able to find anything in the end, was 1/10 slower than his best, but definitely had the most out of his tyres, and Leclerc not improving late on either. So Ferrari still scratching their heads. Peter M on hashtag BBC F1 says Alex Brundle on Spring Watch when? It's got to happen, hasn't it? We've had the fish, we've had the porcupine now.
I think I might be busy that day.
More grumpy than a spiky porcupine. It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen one day. As it is, we are a couple of hours away now for qualifying at the Mexican Grand Prix. Verstappen with the hat-trick of practice topping times. Albon twice getting second. This has got to be more than Williams flattering themselves. At this time, normally you're taking the fuel out, you're running in your qualifying spec, trying to dial in, and Albon seems to be genuinely there. And more bafflingly, it's not even close. He's 3/10 up on the fastest non-Red Bull. It's rapid.
It's just it's a circuit that's encapsulating Williams this year. Performance level slightly weird. I can't put them in the box as to where their performance is coming from. I think a lot of it is coming from Alex Albon. When you look at the comparison to Logan Sargent, 8/10 off the pace, sitting in 11th place. But yeah, quite clearly they found something spectacular mechanically through that middle sector, and in terms of the way the car is feeling underneath Albon, let's see if he can replicate that when the chips are down and the Ferraris get their act together in qualifying.
Lando Norris was the closest man to Max Verstappen yesterday, only 8th quickest today, behind his teammate Oscar Piastri. So McLaren seemed to have lost a bit of performance overnight. That was a strange session for them.
Yeah, it was a strange session. The cars were really shimmying through the middle sector. Norris didn't have as good a time as Piastri. Interestingly, he put together what looked like a neater and tidier lap. Valtteri Bottas finds his way into the leading positions again in the Alfa Romeo, and this time Yuki Tsunoda was the AlphaTauri, making his way into the top 7 drivers. So they look bona fide fast, both across Tsunoda and Ricciardo. AlphaTauri do. That's real pace from them this weekend.
Yeah, should be a very, very interesting qualifying session coming up. That is the end of free practice. Max Verstappen completes a practice hat-trick, but Albon looking quick in the Williams, Daniel Ricciardo looking good in the AlphaTauri. Plenty of underdogs in the mix. Can Mercedes rise as well? We will have qualifying at 10 o'clock on BBC Sports Extra. Tune in then.